Chapter 7. I've had to switch to my laptop because my computer's camera, which has been giving us issues, is dead. So, hopefully this will work. We're moving on to Chapter 7. The story of the staff, strange clerics, and eerie feelings. Ooh. The thick woods of Solus Vale were a green mass of vibrant life. Beneath the dense roof of the Valen woods flourished thistlebrush and greenwald. The ground was crisscrossed with the bothersome tangle-shoot vines. They had to be trod upon with great care, or they would suddenly snake around an ankle, trapping the hapless victim until he was devoured by one of the many predatory animals lurking in the vale, thus providing the tangle-shoot with what it needed to live: blood. It took over an hour of hacking and chopping through the brush to get to Haven Road. All of them were scratched, torn, and tired, and the long stretch of smooth packed dirt that carried travelers to Haven or beyond was a welcome sight. It wasn't until they stopped just inside of the road and rested that they realized there was no sound. A hush had fallen over the land, and as if every creature were holding its breath, waiting. Now that they had reached the road, no one was in a particular hurry to step out of the shelter of the brush. "Do you think it's safe?" Karaman asked, peering through the hedge. "Safe or not, it's the way we have to go," Tanis snapped. "Unless you can fly, or unless you want to go back to the forest. It took us over an hour to travel a few hundred yards. We ought to reach the crossroads by next week at this pace." The big man flushed, chagrined. "I didn't mean—" "I'm sorry," Tanis sighed. He looked down the road. The great Valenwoods formed a dark corridor in the gray light. "I don't like it any better than you do." "Do we separate or stay together?" Sturm interrupted what he considered idle chatter with cold cold practicality. "We stay together," Tanis said. Then, after a moment, he added, "Still, someone ought to scout." "I will, Tanis," Tass volunteered, popping out of the brush right underneath Tanis's elbow. "No one would ever suspect a Kender of traveling alone." Tanis frowned. Tass was right. No one would suspect him. Kender were all afflicted with wanderlust, traveling through Krynn in search of adventure. But Tass had the disconcerting habit of forgetting his mission and wandering off if something more interesting caught his attention. "Very well," Tanis said, finally. "But remember this, Tasselhoff Burfoot. Keep your eyes open and your wits about you. No roaming off the road, and above all," Tanis fixed the Kender's eyes with his own sternly, "keep your hands out of other people's belongings." "Unless they're bakers," Cameron added. Tass giggled, pushed his way through the final feet of the brush, and started off down the road, his hoopak staff digging holes in the mud, his pouches jouncing up and down as he walked. They heard his voice lift into Kender trail song. No, I'm not going to sing. Here it is. Your one true love's a sailing ship that anchors at our pier. We lift her sails, we man her decks, we scrub the portholes clear. And yes, our lighthouse shines for her, and yes, our shores are warm. We steer her into harbor, any port in a storm. The sailors stand on the docks, the sailors stand in line, as thirsty as a dwarf for gold, or centaurs for cheap wine. For all the sailors love her, and flock to where she's moored, each man hoping that he might go down, all hands on board. Tanis, grinning, allowed a few minutes to pass after hearing the last verse of Tass's song before starting out. Finally, they stepped on the road with as much fear as a troupe of unskilled actors facing a hostile audience. It felt as if every eye on Krynn was on them. The deep shade under the flame-colored leaves made it impossible to see anything in the woods, even after a few feet from the road. Sturm walked ahead of the group, alone, in bitter silence. Tanis knew that though the knight held his head proudly, he was slogging through his own darkness. Karaman and Raistlin followed, then Tanis keeping his eye on the mage, concerned about his ability to keep up. Raistlin had experienced some difficulty in getting through the brush, but was moving along well now. He leaned on his staff with one hand, holding open a book with the other. Tanis at first wondered what the mage was studying. Then he realized it was his spell book. It is the curse of the Magi that they must constantly study and recommit their spells to memory every day. The words of magic flame in their mind, then flicker and die when the spell is cast. Each spell burns up some of the magician's physical and mental energy until he is totally exhausted and must rest before he can cast his magic again. Flint stumped along on the other side of Caraman. The two began to argue softly about the 10-year-old boating accident. Trying to catch a fish with your bare hands, Flint grumbled in disgust. Tanis came last, walking next to the plainsman. He turned his attention to Goldmoon. Seeing her clearly in the flecked gray light of the trees, he noticed lines around her eyes that made her appear older than her 29 years. Our lives have not been easy, Goldmoon confided in him as they walked. Riverwind and I have loved each other many years, but it is the law of my people that a warrior who wants to marry a chieftain's daughter must perform some great feat to prove himself worthy. It was worse for us. Riverwind's family was cast out of our tribe years ago for refusing to worship our ancestors. His grandfather believed in ancient gods who existed before Kryn, though he could find little evidence of them left on Kryn. My father was determined I should not marry so far below my station. He sent Riverwind on an impossible quest to find some object with holy properties that would prove the existence of these ancient gods. Of course, my father didn't believe such an object existed. He hoped Riverwind would meet his death, or that I would come to love another. She looked up at the tall warrior walking beside her and smiled. His face was hard, his eyes staring far away. Her smile faded. Sighing, she continued her story, speaking softly, more to herself than Tanis. Riverwind was gone long years, and my life was empty. I sometimes thought my heart would die. Then, just a week ago, he returned. He was half dead and out of his mind with a raging fever. He stumbled into camp and fell at my feet, his skin burning to the touch. His hand clutched this staff. We had to pry his fingers loose. Even unconscious, he would not release it. He raved in his fever about a dark place, a broken city where death had black wings. Then, when he was nearly wild with fear and terror, and the servants had to tie his arms to the bed, he remembered a woman dressed in blue light. She came to him in the place of darkness, he said, and healed him and gave him the staff. When he remembered her, he grew calmer and his fever broke. 2 days ago, she paused. Had it really been only 2 days? It seemed a lifetime. Sighing, she continued again. He presented the staff to my father, telling him that it had been given to him by a goddess, though he did not know her name. My father looked at the staff. Goldmoon held it up and commanded it to do something, anything. Nothing happened. He threw it back to Riverwind, proclaiming him a fraud, and ordered the people to stone him to death for his blasphemy. Goldmoon's face grew pale as she spoke. Riverwind's face darkened and shadowed. The tribe bound Riverwind and dragged him to the grieving wall, she said, barely speaking above a whisper. They started hurling rocks. He looked at me with so much love and shouted that not even death could separate us. I couldn't bear the thought of living my life alone without him. I ran to him. The rocks struck us. Goldmoon put her hand to her forehead, wincing at the remembered pain, and Tanis's attention was drawn to a fresh, jagged scar on her tanned skin. There was a blinding flash of light. When Riverwind and I could see again, we were standing on the road outside of Solace, the staff glowing blue. Then it dimmed and faded until it was as you see it now. It was then we decided to go to Haven and ask the wise men at the temple about the staff. Riverwind, he asked, troubled. What do you remember of this broken city? Where was it? Riverwind didn't answer. He glanced at Tanis out of the corner of his dark eyes, and it was obvious his thoughts had been far away. He then stared off into the shadowy trees. Tanis Heffelden, he finally said. That is your name? Among humans, that's what I'm called, Tanis answered. My elvish name is long and difficult to pronounce for humans. Riverwind frowned. Why is it, he asked, that you are called half-elf and not half-man? The question struck Tanis like a blow across his face. He could almost envision himself sprawling in the dirt and had to force himself to stop and swallow an angry retort. He knew Riverwind was asking this question for a reason. It had not been meant as an insult. It was a test, Tanis realized. He chose his words carefully. According to humans, half an elf is but part of a whole being. Half a man is a cripple. Riverwind considered this, finally nodding once, abruptly, and answered Tanis's question. I wandered many long years, he said. Often I had no idea where I was. I followed the sun and the moon and the stars. My last journey was like a dark dream. He was silent for a moment. When he spoke, it was as if he were talking from some great distance. It was a city once beautiful, with white buildings supported by tall columns of marble. It was, it was, but it is now as if some great hand had picked up the city and cast it down a mountainside. The city is now very old and very evil. Black death on wings, Tanis said softly. It rose like a god from the darkness. Its creatures worshipped it, shrieking and howling. The plainsman's face paled beneath his sun-baked skin. He was sweating in the chill morning air. I can speak of it no more. Goldmoon laid her hand on his arm, and the tension in his face eased. And out of the horde came a woman who gave you the staff? Tanis pursued. She healed me, Tanis said simply. I was dying. Tanis stared intently at the staff Goldmoon held in her hands. It was just a plain ordinary staff that he never noticed until the attention was called to it. A strange device that was carved on the top, and feathers such as the barbarians admire were tied around it. Yet he had seen it glow blue. He had felt its healing power. Was this a gift from the ancient gods, come to aid them in their time of need? Or was it evil? What did he know of these barbarians anyway? Tanis thought about Raceland's claim that the staff could only be touched by those of pure heart. He shook his head. It sounded good. He wanted to believe it. Tanis, lost in thought, felt Goldmoon touch his arm. He looked up to see Sturm and Caramon signaling. The half-elf suddenly realized he and the plainsman had fallen far behind the others. He broke into a run. What is it? Sturm pointed. The scout returns, he said dryly. Tasselhoff was running down the road towards him. He waved his arms 3 times. Into the bush! Tanis ordered. The group hurriedly left the road and plunged into the bushes and shrub trees growing along the south edge, all except Sturm. Come on! Tanis pulled his hand over the knight's arm. Sturm pulled away from the half-elf. I will not hide in a ditch, the knight said coldly. Sturm! Tanis began to fight and control his rising anger. He choked back bitter words that would do no good and might cause irreparable harm. Instead, he turned from the knight, his lips compressed, and waited in grim silence for the Kender. Tas came dashing up, pounces and packs bouncing wildly as he ran. Clerics! He gasped. A party of 8! 8 clerics! Sturm sniffed. I thought it was battalions of goblin guards at least. I believe we can handle a party of clerics. I don't know, Tas said dubiously. I've seen clerics from every part of Krynn, and I've never seen the likes of these. He glanced down the road apprehensively, then gazed up at Tanis, unusual seriousness in his brown eyes. Do you remember what Tika said about the strange men in Solis hanging around with Hedrick? How they were hooded and dressed in heavy robes? Well, that describes these clerics exactly. And, Tanis, they gave me an eerie feeling. The Kender shuddered. They'll be in sight in a few moments. Tanis glanced at Sturm. The knight raised his eyebrows. Both of them knew the Kenders did not feel the emotion of fear, yet were extremely sensitive to other creatures' natures. Tanis couldn't remember when the sight of any being on Krynn ever gave Tas an eerie feeling. And he had been with the cleric in some tight spots. Here they come, Tanis said. He and Sturm and Tas moved back into the shadows of the trees to the left, watching the cleric slowly around the bend of the road. They were too far away for the half-elf to be able to tell much about them, except that they were moving very slowly, dragging a large cart behind them. Maybe you should talk to them, Sturm, Tanis said softly. We need information about the road ahead, but be careful, my friend. I'll be careful, Sturm said, smiling. I have no intention of throwing my life away needlessly. The knight gripped Tanis's arm in a moment of silent apology. Then he dropped his hand to loosen his sword and its antique scabbard. He walked across to the other side of the road and leaned up against a broken down wooden fence, head bowed, as though resting. Tanis stood a moment, irresolute, then turned and made his way through the brush, Tasselhoff at his heels. "What is it?" Caramon grunted as Tanis and Tass appeared. The big warrior shifted his girth, causing his arsenal of weapons to clank loudly. The rest of the companions were huddled together, concealed behind thick clumps of brush, yet unable to get a clear view of the road. "Hush!" Tanis had knelt down behind Caramon and Riverwind, who crouched in the bush a few feet to Tanis's left. "Clerics," he whispered. "A group of them coming down the road. Sturm's going to question them." "Clerics?" Caramon snorted derisively and settled back down comfortably on his heels, but Raistlin stirred restlessly. "Clerics?" he whispered thoughtfully. "I do not like this." "What do you mean?" asked Tanis. Raistlin peered at the half-elf from the shadows of his red hood. All Tanis could see were the mage's golden hourglass eyes, narrow slits of cunning and intelligence. "Strange clerics," Raistlin spoke with elaborate patience, as one speaks to a child. "The staff of healing, clerical powers. Such powers have not been seen on Krynn since before the cataclysm. Caramon and I saw one of these cloaked and hooded men in Solis. Don't you find it odd, my friend, that these clerics and the staff turn up at the same time, in the same place, when neither have been seen before? Perhaps the staff is truly theirs, by right." Tanis glanced at Goldmoon. Her face was shadowed with worry. Surely she must be wondering the same thing. He looked back at the road. He looked back at the road again. The cloaked figures were moving at a crawling pace, pulling a cart. Sturm sat on the fence, stroking his mustaches. The companions waited in silence. Gray clouds massed overhead. The sky grew darker, and soon water began to drip through the branches of the trees. "There, it's raining," Flint grumbled. "Isn't it enough that I have to squat in a bush like a toad? Now I get soaked to the skin." Tanis glared at the dwarf. Flint mumbled and fell silent. Soon the companions could hear nothing but the rain splatting against the already wet leaves, drumming on shields and helm. It was a cold, steady rain, the kind that seeps through the thickest cloak, and ran off Caramon's dragon helm and trickled down his neck. Raistlin began to shiver and cough, covering his mouth with his hand to muffle a sound, as everyone stared at him in alarm. Tanis looked to the road. Like Tass, he had never seen anything to compare to these clerics in his 100 years of life on Krynn. They were tall, about 6 feet in height. Long robes shrouded their bodies. Hooded cloaks covered their robes. Even their feet and hands were wrapped in cloth, like bandages covering leprous wounds. As they neared Sturm, they glanced around warily. One of them stared straight into the bush where the companions were hiding. They could see only dark, glittering eyes through the swash of cloth. "Hail, Knight of Solamnia," the cleric said in the common tongue. His voice was hollow, lisping, an inhuman voice. Tanis shivered. "Greetings, brethren," Sturm answered, also in common. "I have traveled many miles this day, and you are the first travelers I have passed. I have heard strange rumors, and I seek information about the road ahead. Where do you come from?" "We come from the east, and originally," the cleric answered. "But today we travel from Haven. It is a better day for journey, knight, which is perhaps why you find the road empty. We ourselves would not undertake such a journey, save we are driven by necessity. We did not pass you on the road, so you must be traveling from Solis, Sir Knight." Sturm nodded. Several of the clerics standing at the rear of the cart turned their hooded faces toward each other, muttering. The lead cleric spoke to them in a strange, guttural language. Tanis looked at his companions. Tasselhoff shook his head, as did the rest of them. None of them had heard that language before. The cleric switched back to common. "I am curious to hear rumors you speak of, knight." "There is talk of armies in the north," Sturm replied. "I am traveling that way to my homeland of Solamnia. I would not want to run into a war I was not invited." "We have not heard these rumors," the cleric answered.
So far as we know, the road to the north is clear.
Ah, that's what comes from listening to drunken companions, Sturm shrugged. But what is necessary but what is the necessity you speak of that drives the brethren out into such foul weather?
We seek a staff,
The cleric answered readily.
a blue crystal staff. We heard it had been sighted in Solus. Do you know aught of it?
Yes, Sturm answered. I heard of such a staff in Solus. I heard of the armies to the north from the same companions. Am I to believe these stories or not? This appeared to confound the cleric for a moment. He glanced around as if uncertain how to react. Tell me, Sturm, lounging back against the fence. Why do you seek a blue crystal staff? Surely one of plain, sturdy wood would suit your reverend gentleman better.
It is a sacred staff of healing,
The cleric replied gravely.
one of our brethren is sorely ill. He will die without the blessed touch of this holy relic.
Healing? Sturm raised his eyebrows. A sacred staff of healing would be of great value. How did you come to misplace such a rare and wonderful object?
We did not misplace it.
The cleric snarled. Tanis saw the man's wrapped hands clench in anger.
It was stolen from our holy order. We tracked the foul thief to a barbarian in the plains, then lost his trail. There are rumors of strange goings on in Solus, however, and it is there we go.
He gestured to the back of the cart.
This dismal journey is but little sacrifice for our companion to pain and agony of our brother endures.
I'm afraid I cannot help, Sturm began. I can help you. A calm, clear voice from behind Tanis. He reached out, but it was too late. Goldmoon had risen from the brush and was walking determinedly toward the road, pushing aside tree branches and brambles. Riverwind jumped to his feet and crashed through the shrubbery after her. Goldmoon! Tanis risked a piercing whisper. I must know, she said. The clerics, hearing Goldmoon's voice, glanced at each other knowingly, nodding their hooded heads. Tanis sensed trouble, but before he could say anything, Caraman jumped to his feet. The plainsmen are not leaving me behind in a ditch while they have all the fun, Caraman stated, plunging through the thicket after Riverwind. Has everyone gone mad? Tanis growled. He grabbed Tasloff by the shirt collar, dragged the kender back as he was about to leap joyfully after Cameron. Flint, watch the kender. Raceland! No need to worry about me, Tanis, the mage whispered. I have no intentions of going out there. Right. Well, stay here. Tanis rose to his feet and slowly started forward. An eerie feeling was creeping over him as well. Thus ended chapter 7.